Good day everyone, my name's Makari and welcome to another Warframe guide, this time with Nezha, in the new deluxe skin that was given to him only recently. And with this new skin came changes that has made Nezha even more of a delight than he otherwise was. Nezha has always been a fun frame but has never really seen much uniqueness to himself. But with the changes, he's now a much more unique frame with much more of a use to a team, with much more ease of use. However, he's not the simplest of frames to use, and there's a lot of synchronicity between his abilities that need to be shown. So we're going to give you this guide. This is a simple beginner's guide. There's no depth to it. It is to give you a summary as to how his abilities work, what they do, without looking at, 0.5% damage if you actually know. This is to give you a general idea of his mods, his playstyle, some basic builds, and what you can do with him to help your team. So, we're first of all going to look at his abilities. So first of all, we have Firewalker. Now, as the name would suggest, Firewalker literally spits fire out from your feet. This can work in conjunction with things like Blazing Chakram. Basically, you can combine the two together where if you use your Blazing Chakram and then use it to teleport, the area you land will then eject fire, which is based on power strength, and it can deal a fair bit of damage and cause stuns, which is quite nice. The main thing your Blazing Fire is used for, though, is controlling an area. You put the fire down on the floor. The amount of fire you have is affected by duration, and the damage it deals is also based on power strength, so you get a very unique little... There's not many other frames that really have this sort of trail of fire coming out from behind them, and there is an augment that affects this as well, but we'll go into those augments in a bit. Secondly, we have Blazing Chakram. Now, Blazing Chakram is a very unique ability. It's basically a hula hoop, and what Nezha does is when you activate the two, it throws it out in front of you, and the range it travels is based on your duration, your range. And then when you activate your two again, so long as it's in flight, you will then teleport to the location of your Chakram, giving you a bit of maneuverability. There is some things that will work in conjunction with this as well, but we'll look at this a little bit later. Then you have your Warding Halo. This has had the biggest change made to it out of everything. When it comes down to the changes, most of the changes are comfort of life, like all his abilities are snappier, quicker, they cast faster now, but the biggest change was made to the Warding Halo. Warding Halo used to be like Rhino's Iron Skin. It would give you a shield between your health and taking damage. Now it is purely 90% mitigation. However, it still works in the same fundamental way where it's based, the actual potency of your Warding Halo is based off of your health mixed with your base armor, then multiplied by a portion of your power strength. So this sort of gives you an idea as to what you're going to be modding for. And what can also affect this is when you first activate it, you have 4 seconds of invulnerability, complete invulnerability, where any damage taken increases the overall durability and size of your Warding Halo. You can still cast this onto other players with 50% effectiveness with the augment. It's just the way it affects the target is now changed. It's no longer immunity. Now you have Divine Spears. Divine Spears didn't see much of a change. It is still the fundamental crowd control with a bit of damage in there, but it has some use with Blazing Chakram. Blazing Chakram you would see as the core of Nezha, along with Warding Halo. These are the two core abilities, and depending on the way you want to play will depend how you build him. It's just you'll always find that Warding Halo is at the core. So it doesn't really matter what build you go for. You're always going to find that there's going to be some kind of use for these, for the Blazing Chakram and the Warding Halo. So we're going to show you the abilities individually. But first, let me get right. So we're going to look at the abilities just on a very basic level. So your one, let's get some energy. Your one is Firewalker. The Firewalker, as I said earlier, will cause fire to spat out from your feet. And whilst Firewalker is active, when you use your 2, which is Blazing Chakram, so we'll look at both these abilities together, when you teleport to the destination, like so, your Firewalker will then deal a slight radial explosion of fire damage, and it then gets overheated, and this damage is based on power strength. So you can see a bit of synergy between the two abilities there, which is quite nice. Again, you're not going to really use your 1 specifically for damage. It's really good for control because it causes a slight stagger, which you can sort of see happening here. It's something that can be quite nice when you're doing low-level missions, so you can ward off areas as the enemy walk through it. It does also give a slight... it gives... allies that walk over the flame have their statuses removed as well, which is quite nice. But it's more of a a gimmick than anything else. It's not what I'd really use Nezha for specifically, unless you're using the augmented pyroclastic flow. Then you move on to the 3. Now, what I mentioned earlier, this 3 is now pretty quick. You don't need to stop to cast it. You can use it on the move. And the size of the actual bubble itself, shown by the counter down the top and right, that goes up within the 4 seconds of immunity you have. Any damage you take will then up that based on the amount of damage you're taking. And the actual overall size of the bubble is based on your health, armor, and multiplied by a portion of your power strength. So that's how good, like, your 3 is still incredibly powerful. But because it's only mitigation now, it now opens up a bit of viability for using things like healing returns. Because healing returns gives you health back on status type damage. So as you're dealing status damage, you're gaining back health. And because you have 90% reduced damage, you're basically regenerating any health you would lose whilst dealing damage with healing returns. But that's something you can look at on your own time. It's not something that's really relevant to this guide at the moment, but it's something to look at. So finally, you have your 4, which is Divine Spears. Divine Spears, very simply, it impales the enemy and acts as a form of crowd control. This in turn is very simple to understand. The more duration you have, the longer it lasts. Now, there are some things you can do that work in conjunction with Reaping Chakram. Whilst an enemy is speared, if they are killed by your 2, then they will, if you hit anything that is affected by Divine Spear with your 2, and they die, they are then marked. I can't remember. They're marked with a buff that will then cause them to drop extra health plates and energy plates when they die. And by plates, I mean orbs. Sorry. So those are the base abilities as a whole. We'll put them into a bit more of a debut in a moment. We're now going to take a quick look at the builds and how they work together, and the different augments and how they then work in synergy with each other. Alright, so now we're going to take a look at some very quick, simple builds. Any primed mod, as a disclaimer, you can replace with the regular version. I just use the primed version because I'm like that and very weird. So, this is a beginner's build. This one, you can get rid of power drift if you don't have it. Any of these mods can be changed around, but the base idea is this is your beginner's build. You have your initial health, you have some initial armor. Armored agility can be replaced with steel fiber instead. I use this because it's really nice to then work in conjunction with your firewalk. Yes, that one. Because obviously the faster you're moving, the more distance you're traveling, the more fire you're going to put down in the time it's available. And then obviously you have the armor, which is beneficial to the warding halo, which is quite nice. Everything else is just based on making sure you can cast more abilities and making sure the fire lasts longer. Power strength for a bit more damage, and the range then helps you with your the travel distance on your Blazing Chakram, and the more things to be affected by your 4, and then dealing enough damage with each ability to be consistent with, like, I'd say this build will quite handily be able to kill most things up to level 50, 60 with not too much of an issue, even with the default mods without the Prime version. And again, you can be very playful with a default build like this. You can mix and match based on what you enjoy. Just bear in mind that the duration is the thing that will affect most of your abilities the most fundamentally. Depending on what you want to play, if you play with Firewalker, if you play with your Divine Spears, then duration is your focus. If you play with Blazing Chakram, with Warding Halo, then you're going to be looking slightly more at power strength, then mixing in survivability as well, just to make that Warding Halo stronger. Duration doesn't really become so much of an issue when you're focusing on Blazing Chakram, because you want that to be hitting harder and to be spreading the damage even further. So, this is a basic build. Then now we're going to look at the augments. There are 2 augments that I'd say are of interest. None of them really make the most dramatic amounts of differences, other than one, which is the Reaping Chakram. Now, this adds a very interesting dynamic to the Chakram. So if we're going to take a look at this, each enemy hit increases the ring's damage by 2, and the chances for enemies to drop health orbs by 0.25%. This can become very, very interesting very, very quickly, and I'm going to show you why. Now, the build in general here, when you're focusing on Reaping Chakram, you're looking at some duration to keep the enemies lifted, some power strength to make the Chakram hit harder, because then you're multiplying each time it splits, and then a bit of efficiency to make life easy for yourself. So, the way this works, when you hit a target with your 2 that is affected by Divine Spear, it will then duplicate and split into other chakrams. So we're going to gather these guys up here, going to spear them, and then we're going to use our 2 to charge. The chakram is duplicating over and over again because they're so close to each other. Even level 100 enemies will die in almost one hit with this ability if timed properly. This does rely on the closeness of the enemy to be close enough to make it to chain to each other, but it is incredibly powerful, and against things like infested or Grineer targets that have melee base, then you're going to be absolutely great with this build. And you can also charge up the chakram as well to deal even more damage, although I would recommend that the non-charged version is slightly better, because the non-charged version actually targets specific enemies and will fly on a flight path. The charged version flies in a direct path without targeting. So the charged version does do more damage, but the non-charged version will target enemies in a much more effective manner and help the chakram to split. So that's the way the Reaping Chakram works. Obviously, you then get all the extra loot benefits, which can help your team, which is really nice. And you can see it's incredibly powerful. This was never possible with Nezha before the change. So this is incredibly interesting to see how powerful he has now become because of all the changes that have been made to him. On the fly, they're not perfect. They are definitely not the most ideal builds you want to go for, but they do give you a general... Really? So, we're now going to take a look at a pyroclastic flow build. I'd like to make a disclaimer as well, these builds are not perfect, they are builds that I've made on the fly to see how they work in conjunction with the augments. You can definitely improve on them, there are definitely better builds. These are just going to be good for beginning, and they can be then improved on with your own testing. Now, Pyroclastic Flow is a very interesting augment. Firewalker augment accumulates 150% of the damage Firewalker deals, unleashing it in a trail of fire that lasts 10 seconds. So the way this would work very simply is you would cast it, as it's dealing damage, it then gains a stacking buff. At the end of the... you then can unleash it, dealing an extra burst of damage, which staggers and deals more damage. I'm not going to show how this works as a whole, but this build can also work as a generalized build. You can change out Pyroclastic Flow for the other augment, which we're going to look at now as well, which is Safeguard. Safeguard is a utility augment. It's extremely nice and has always been good for doing team games. If your team lacks survivability, then you are able to cast this on your allies. Warding Halo can now be cast on allies with 50% effectivity. It's pretty much self-explanatory. You can use your Warding Halo on your teammates, including your pets. So we're going to put this onto my Kavat just to show you what I mean. So whatever you have modded your 3 for, you can now have on your teammates, and they can now have a shiny ring floating around them to show how special they are. Because if you love them, put a ring on them. But that is the general guide for Nezha. He is vastly superior to what he was. I love what they've done to him. This deluxe skin is godly and has a really nice helmet, which doesn't look bad at all in any way, shape or form. Things to just bear in mind, Nezha definitely isn't perfect at the moment. He still has areas that he falls off in, but he adds a lot more to a team. There is much more damage, there's much more utility to your team. And more so than anything, I love this change. I actually will happily play Nezha on a regular basis now because of the change. Let me know what you think of these Nezha changes. Let me know if you know of any other builds that are worthwhile in the comments below, please. And I will see all of you top hatters in the next video. Ta-ra!